So I thought I'd share another one of my high school essays because I just hate myself that much, I guess. The truth is, I've been so lazy about writing the script for a couple videos I'm planning that I'm using pre existing material until then to convince myself that I'm doing something worthwhile in my life. I don't know when I'll finish the new scripts, but who cares? Four people? Yeah, alright, whatever. Just real quick, I wanted to ensure that it's clear that I only considered the Nolan trilogy for this high school psych essay, which is foolish, but the thing is that there are so many different interpretations and reiterations of this fucker that I wouldn't be able to analyze anything if I don't narrow down my source material. Secondly, this is for a high school psych class. I'm not an actual psychologist, so if I get shit wrong, feel free to shit on me in the comments, which is assuming that people are watching this in the first place. One of the most challenging questions to answer for both casual fans and academic intellectuals is whether there has been a more complex fictional comic book character than Bruce Wayne. Wayne, who puts on the mask of Batman, a skilled vigilante, to bring down crime in his city, has been represented in mainstream media throughout years since his creation, though much of these adaptations have failed to go beyond the superficial badassery and portray the many layers which constitute the Dark Knight. Wayne, as a character, comes to his defining moment at a very young age when his billionaire parents are murdered in front of him. This leads to a wide array of emotions that gets accumulated in his adolescent mind, some that he openly displays, while others that he keeps to himself. The death of his parents also gives birth to some distinct psychological disorders in Bruce that stay with him up until he becomes Batman. One of the most obvious ones is depression. In the words of psychiatrists, the symptoms shown by young Wayne could be a sign of depression. The primary cause behind this is his survivor's guilt, a mental condition where someone feels guilty for surviving a traumatic event that others didn't. In a way, he blames himself and thinks himself wrong for living through his parents' murder that he witnessed. This ties into a bigger internal conflict faced by young Bruce. Clinical psychologist Robin Rosenberg alleges that Wayne is a perfect representation of PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder. Batman's serious temperament and his sense of guilt over the death of his parents could be construed as signs of depression, and his detachment could be taken as a sign of post traumatic stress disorder. This disorder is often faced by soldiers or victims of disasters, sexual assaults, or terrorist acts, and involves anger and sorrow regarding their experience as well as haunting dreams or thoughts that may affect them. Young Bruce suffers through a similarly traumatic experience that personally materializes within his conscious and leads to immense stress. Amongst the four thinking styles, Wayne's dominant thinking style would be analytical and then structural. Wayne, as both a child and an adult, is incredibly antisocial, and his dislike of the unusual makes him less likely to be a conceptual thinker as well. While Batman is unpredictable, he still likes to plan out certain events and is shown to respond towards change immediately. Batman, as a detective, enjoys solving complicated riddles and problems, which makes sense considering that the majority of his enemies are criminal masterminds, instead of mighty, muscular beings. Batman's weaknesses comes directly from the exploitation of his feeble, heavily guarded mind, making him hostile towards emotions. As Bruce Wayne, he pretends to be gregarious and intuitive with people, though he rarely ever lets anyone close to him. Both Wayne and his vigilante alter ego show signs of a first third flexibility. Both are focused on their goals and pay little attention to surrounding trivial matters. They are not adaptable, just like a bat, and have principles to which they adhere to. Where Wayne differs from Batman is assertiveness. Wayne is rather relaxed and easygoing, or at least he pretends to be, while Batman is forceful and willing to take drastic measures to accomplish his goal. One of the most defining characteristics of Bruce Wayne is his isolation from the rest of the world. In the second installment of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy, the Joker tells Batman,
Don't talk like one of them. You're not. Even if you'd like to be. To them, you're just a freak. Like me. They need you right now. But when they don't, they'll cast you out. Like a leper. See, their morals, their code. It's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
the they refers to society as a whole, really, and the Joker is exploiting Bruce Wayne's insecurity regarding his position amongst other humans. He's a second third expressive, not necessarily quiet, but he isn't outgoing either, simply reserved and to himself. Wayne's fear of being left out stems from the death of his parents itself. Wayne's blame shifting on self will be explained by psychodynamic theorists like Sigmund Freud as psychological projection, Though it must be noted that the boy is not shifting blame on others for his impulses or qualities, but it's rather quite the opposite. Wayne is blaming himself for letting something happen as if he was in any position to change the outcomes of the situation. This could be interpreted as a reaction formation. As a result of others sympathizing with him, Wayne's id reacts recklessly by clashing against the ego and superego, and coming to a firm conclusion as to him being responsible for his parents' death. But on the same note, Wayne is also convincing himself against the idea that his parents themselves were responsible for their death. Thomas and Martha Wayne have a reputation of standing up for honor, but when their killer demands valuables, their internal weaknesses, ideologies, and fear for Bruce allows them to be diplomatic towards the killer. Wayne is in denial of this weakness, and his parents' liberal viewpoint that he inherited prevents him from entirely assigning fault to the killer. So, he goes on to rather blame his own powerlessness. When training with Ra's al Ghul, the mentor brings back this idea and Bruce is shown to be fighting against it. Either ways, the blame slowly shifts from himself to the prevailing injustice and corruption of Gotham City, becoming the basis of his purpose to clean the city of criminals, which results in a sublimation of his guilt towards something more rational. Wayne also sees his parents' killer in other criminals, meaning that he may be displacing his violent impulses towards someone powerless against him. Wayne rationalizes such urges to people who care about him, like his butler Alfred Pennyworth, by pointing out the corruption and injustice that needs to be cleaned, as well as the fact of his loss of family during latency. Trait theorists would label Batman as an extraordinary figure based off his idiosyncratic set of rules. Wayne would be a high introvert, low agreeable, highly conscientious, low neurotic, and low openness when it comes to the big fight traits. Though this doesn't necessarily reflect on his personality as a whole, Wayne is definitely an extreme case of individualism. However, the trait theory would not necessarily be able to provide adequate coverage on the billionaire's life and inner psyche. A better approach would be the social cognitive theory, as it would explore as to the causes behind Wayne's behaviors. The behaviorist theory would propose that Batman's sense of justice and struggle for the purification of Gotham comes directly from his father's own agenda to create peace and equality in the city. However, Albert Bandura, the psychologist behind the social learning theory, would argue that his father's motives in politics had little to do with Bruce's, since Batman isn't really fighting for any reward. Bandura would further argue that Batman's motivation is his belief in the symbol he has created and his high self-efficacy. Julian Rotter's expectancy value theory would agree with Bandura, as such that Batman expects little to no reward for himself but just goes ahead to give himself a purpose. This means that Batman also has an internal locus of control, strongly believing in his power to make a good change through his actions and work. Finally, humanistic theorists like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow would propose stepping in Wayne's shoes to realize what it is to be him. Despite his efforts to serve the innocent part of the city, he is almost universally hated by the citizens initially as he works against the law. Although later on others do come in his support, many citizens blame him for making their lives worse. But the humanist theory would suggest inspection and study of the vigilante to understand his actions. Rogers would say that Batman's motive to fight against criminals is his path towards self-actualization, as he did not receive unconditional love during his childhood with the exception of Pennyworth. Batman's self-actualization would be fulfilling the dreams of his parents. Overall, the general public considers Batman to be an action figure, and while he is that, most miss the character study that is prevalent and hidden. The drama surrounding Bruce Wayne defines how he reacts to situations. What makes him interesting is his persistence to keep going and bringing down criminals while treating them humanly. Throughout his chronicle, there have been points where he almost becomes a raging psychopath he fears becoming, but he always comes back from that and returns to being an essential hero. Through numerous perspectives, Batman's motives and personalities can be explored, but why he stands out amongst other comic book heroes is his emotionally intricate yet delicate mind.